Hola guys, and welcome to Capturka Prod, when polygons meet desire. My name's Leon, and today I'd like to talk about a topic like changing the atmosphere. You've probably seen mods for Silent Hill 2 remake that disable the game's main feature, the fog, or even ones where James is basically running around in sunlight, but at the same time the game doesn't lose its charm, and in some ways it even becomes more unsettling. Just look at these screenshots, it's pure uncanny valley, and that got me thinking. I already have this dark oppressive valley location from the Dark Place in Alan Wake 2. The level itself, like New York, but it's not New York, gives me chills as someone who appreciates good art direction. And why not imagine this location in a completely opposite atmosphere? For example, in the soft light of sunrise. That moment when the city wakes up, and even if you feel like crap, you still get this sense of calm. So, how would the atmosphere of this alley change? And what tools can we even use to build it? Not to mention what kind of storytelling could we create here. In this project, I want to achieve 3 goals: improve my lighting skills, share some tips and tricks, and show how the same location can look completely different. And I could just plug in PSA add-on into scene, but that would be really unfair to the audience, because not everyone can afford expensive add-ons used in professional production. Me and Hiko actually bought it ourselves during a Black Friday sale. Since we'll be doing everything manually, this video is going to be quite informative and fairly long. We'll go through some theory first, then I'll show my own example of preparing a base scene, and later that we'll break down every component of the final result step by step. As our engine, we'll use eevee next. If you're not in the mood to listen to my nerdy experience, feel free to jump through timestamps and use these as tips for your own work. And yeah, just in case, for those who don't know me, I'm not a professional 3D artist, not an animator, and definitely not a 3D generalist. But I still have to deal with all this stuff in my projects, sometimes even figuring things out empirically. I'm just sharing my experience. So grab some coffee, whiskey or both, and let's go. I'll start from a distance. What should environment lighting at sunrise actually look like? At first glance it seems very similar to sunset. Same color palette, almost the same sun, golden hour after all, right? But no, there is some similarity, sure, but artists won't let me lie. They definitely had situations where they painted a sunrise and people said, wow, what a beautiful sunset. So what's the difference? Let's look at some examples. No need to go far. I took these photos from my own window. Unfortunately, I can't show you the sun on the horizon. I live in a town surrounded by mountains, but that doesn't stop me from capturing sky tones, which is basically often used for HDRI. Now take a look. This is a sunset. Just an insane explosion of colors. I'm glad I can share it with you. We can immediately tell this is a high contrast scene. Lots of orange, red, dark purple, inky blues, even pink tones. And these shots were taken at sunrise. Notice the pastel palette. Blues, yellows, soft pink tones. By the way, here is a sunrise shot where you can see both pink and orange highlights, similar to sunset but much more subtle. And in this shot you can actually see how the sunlight hits the rooftops. Even the colors of the light itself, it's quite muted, I'd say. Now, knowing all this, I can clearly define for my project what the scene will overall be fairly cold with muted tones. This effect will be enhanced by a light haze, but to prevent it from turning into twilight, we'll add rays of the rising sun, fairy bright morning light, which will contrast with the purplish rich undertone of the environment. Alright, let's make the sunrise in the dark place. First of all, we disable all canonical and non-canonical light sources. Even if you had neon signs, it depends on your composition, but it's usually better to turn them off because they pull attention. It also depends on the setting. For example, if we rip in a Cyberpunk 2077 location, I wouldn't disable them. I also moved some skyscrapers slightly to the right and left for composition purposes, so I could get a bit of horizon in the frame. And about Night Springs, yes, I know the original texture is different, but Ninja Reaper didn't capture that part properly, so everything here is low poly, and honestly, I got so tired of searching for the original banner in the game files that I just gave up and decided to focus on something more useful. Naturally, we also don't need rain anymore, and we don't need animated splashes. The smoke clouds I previously scaled up and placed in the scene look cool, but for sunrise vibe they're a bit out of place. And this is very important. Check face orientation in viewport overlay for all objects. I ran into a situation where after ripping, my entire scene was basically flipped. You don't have to fix everything, but at least fix the objects that will receive light. This is a common Ninja Reaper issue, and unfortunately you can't really automate it fully. Maybe partially for closed objects like cubes, but otherwise you'll completely break triangle orientation in the meshes. Now about HDRI. I just googled a nice HDRI texture of New York and found this. It's actually a sunset photo, but with some filter in it, can easily be turned into sunrise. The point is, I liked it overall, so I downloaded it. Plus, it's a nice extra challenge to convert it into sunrise mood. Now I want to integrate this HDRI into composition. For example, that part of one of the buildings sticks out on the horizon. Why not? We'll go to shading, world, create environment texture, and connect it to background. But that's not enough. We need to align the building properly to the background, so we create texture coordinate, connect it to mapping, and connect that to environment texture. Then we adjust coordinates and mapping. In my case, I like this tower and the gradient next to it, so I rotated HDRI like this. But there's still too much orange and pink in the air. And considering we also have brick walls in the scene, people would say, "Leon, what are you talking about? This is clearly sunset." So I added two nodes. Hue saturation value. I used these specific settings, and I'd like to point out that you shouldn't push the hue slider too much. Then I added a mix shader and blended in a subtle blue with this very low factor to enhance the cold lighting. I used this color, and with that all combined, we get a decent environment texture. And don't worry if it feels a bit too pale on the horizon. We'll got some great clouds above that you can always use in your advantage. You might have seen an example of this in my feed where I posted a render of Casey shot from a low angle. We'll take another look at that version in the end. Now look, rebuilding everything from scratch would be painful since I already prepared a base. And honestly, I doubt anyone would want to watch me tweak this for hours, because I usually do like this. So I allowed my final scene, and we'll check it out step by step.
A few moments later.
So here's the scene without compositing. I'll enable elements one by one. I didn't use the sunlight. It could solve a lot of problems, but I didn't like the result, so I placed everything manually. Now we'll go through all light sources, and there is quite a lot, and I'll explain the role of each. But first we need to understand where the light comes from. The dark place is surrounded by skyscrapers, so the chance of direct sunlight reaching the alley is very low. So I focused on something else, reflected light. Sun rays bounce off a skyscraper and partially reach the alley. Another stream of light passes through a building, slightly grazing it. This creates a sense of perspective, like part of the light is entering the corner. Physically accurate? Probably not, but visually convincing. Now the important part, the lighting setup. In this scene I didn't use RGB settings, I used Kelvin color temperature. I set 3000 for warm tones and 6500 for cold ones. 3000 is okay for morning light. And it's used there because our highlight is positioned very high, and we also have light rays hitting in Night Springs building, which means the sun must already be a bit higher, and therefore the light needs to be slightly whiter. One of the main points of interest in the scene is the reflection of the skyscraper. I built it using 3 light sources. Notice that they're placed asymmetrically and have different sizes and intensities. This is done to emphasize the uneven nature of reflection of facade. Otherwise, we get a flat, uniform strip of light, which would look pretty unnatural from the distance. Instead, it becomes broken and irregular and even has a bit of fall-off. Of course, in reality, the light would hit more even surface, but here we have to consider perspective, and distortion from the distance also plays a role. The center light is stronger where the neighboring ones are weaker. Because of perspective, the reflection also stretches slightly onto the adjacent building. Altogether, these create small light jumps across certain parts of the scene. But that isn't enough. Next, we have 2 light sources hitting the Night Springs building, one on top, one slightly lower, lighting up the side. This creates the illusion that sunlight isn't just coming from somewhere behind the entire location, but also leaking through objects. The same light also helps illuminate the fog. We'll get back to that, and it's just fine. I could have added another light to that building over there to illuminate a small section, but visually I didn't like how it looked, so I left it out. It actually helped emphasize the contrast between the lit skyscraper and the brick building in shadow. Along the alley, I also placed several weak light sources to create rim lighting on the upper wires. They're not placed strictly logical or parallel way, and sometimes even in spots that don't make much physical sense. You'll understand why later. The distant light creates a visual path from the reflection on the building to the highlight on the balcony on the right. The closer one gives a slight illusion that some light reaches the left side, gently touching the fire escape. On the right side, there are 2 more light sources. One is placed near the balcony and creates small highlights. The other one is outside the frame. It doesn't exactly light the scene directly, but it slightly brightens that area compared to the left side. It's a cold undertone and subtly highlights one of the metal shutters. It hints that things are getting brighter, but the sunlight hasn't fully reached there yet. That's it for the lighting. Now let's talk about planes used in the scene. The fog planes I created are set up with a very simple shading. Why are there so many of them? Together they created the illusion of depth. The first one is the base layer, fairly cold, emphasizing that if light is present, it's not strong enough yet to fully clear the haze. The second plane catches light from one of the sources. Also, I disabled shadows on the Night Spring building, so that light can fully affect the plane and give it a warm, slightly yellow tint. Because of this, the air gains visual volume. It feels like the light is starting to warm up, the fog preparing it to dissipate. And there is also a final black gradient texture that slightly suggests that the horizon isn't completely empty, that there is something out of there. And don't worry, with added grain and slight blur later, it will blend nicely. To bring some life into the scene, I also added a few seagull planes. I extracted them from the game using RMD dock tools. Originally it's a flipbook texture, but I took individual frames and placed them in the distance. I think it looks much more alive than just a static sky gradient. Maybe it adds a bit of a Hitchcock vibe, you know. And of course, material setup. Again, this isn't a game engine, and in Blender, ripped locations almost always require manual adjustments depending on the setup. So to make everything look at least somewhat decent and not like a mess, I had to tweak quite a lot. Adjust metallic, roughness, fix normals here and there. It's hard to give universal recommendation there. Some shaders look fine as is, others need to be heavily adjusted to work in a shot instead of looking like visual noise. Oh, almost forgot. In my scene I didn't need a sun, but if you want to add one, here's a working method. Shift-A, circle, go into edit mode, press F to fill, then create a shader like this. You can tweak the settings however you like, but the idea is that you have a gradient in the center and you can control the glow using a color ramp as a mask. From there, depending on your atmosphere, you can set the emission color, intensity and size. Overall, I'd say the biggest pain here is placing lights manually. In moments like this, I imagine my scene as a canvas. Once the base is ready, I just place light accents using light sources, almost like painting. The most important thing I try to maintain is a balance between physical accuracy and visual appeal. Yes, it's important that the light follows a logical path, but it doesn't have to be 100% physically correct, like in cycles. Especially when you get to post-processing and start enhancing things like light streaks. And that's it. The compositing will do the rest. Overall, I think this crazy experiment worked out pretty well. Maybe I could push color grading further or tweak the lighting more, but honestly, when you tweak something for too long, it usually just gets worse. I think this scene is ready for the character integration. For example, I can drop Casey on the right side. Maybe he's got a hangover and blend him into composition. I actually already made some previous poses. They just need to be properly integrated into this environment. And I even managed to make one before recording this video. Not sure if I'll redo it or not, but I kind of like how it looks here. If you like this experiment and want to see how expand this concept and to know more info about how to integrate characters in some environment, just let me know and we'll keep pushing these wild 3D fan art experiments further. Thanks for watching, take care, ciao.